What if the poor girl your classmates humiliated turned out to be the long-lost daughter of a billionaire? She was mocked for her clothes, ignored in class, and laughed at like she didn't matter. But the secret she carried, buried deep hidden even from herself, was about to turn the entire school upside down. And when the truth came knocking, it wasn't just one life that changed. It was everyone who had ever underestimated her. You won't believe what happened the moment she picked up the phone. She sat in the back corner of the classroom where the sunlight didn't quite reach, and the whispers grew louder than the lessons. Hannah kept her head down, pencil tapping nervously against a frayed notebook. Her shoes scuffed her backpack, too small for her books, too old to close properly. Around her, students draped in luxury uniforms and gleaming accessories chatted like she didn't exist. Their laughter a language she was never taught. No one sat beside her. They never did. To them, she wasn't part of the school. She was the exception that made them feel superior. Her lunchbox was a second-hand plastic container, its lid cracked but carefully taped. She always opened it slowly, afraid the scent of reheated rice or peanut butter would spark another round of comments. They'd never said her name out loud, not once, but they had plenty of nicknames: charity case, lost girl, field trip, kid. Every label but her own. Hannah had learned to smile through it, to act like she didn't hear. But she always heard, in every whisper, in every stifled laugh when she raised her hand in class, in every sideways glance when she walked past their polished shoes, with her head slightly bowed. She didn't cry. Not here, not yet. But every afternoon when the bell rang and the hallways emptied, she'd walk alone down the hill past the bakery, past the billboard of a perfume she'd never afford, and finally to the one-bedroom apartment she shared with the woman who raised her caned, exhausted and never able to explain where Hannah had come from. And each time she closed that door behind her, she let herself breathe again. Only there did she feel real. Only there was she not reminded of the mystery she carried like a shadow. Because Hannah knew something didn't add up. Not just the silence around her past, but the dreams, the flashes, the feeling that somewhere out there, someone was still looking for her. And though she didn't know it yet, the answer was closer than she ever imagined. It happened again in the third period, just like always. Not the shouting, not the cruel kind of bullying you could report, but the slow, suffocating drip of humiliation that no one ever stops. The teacher asked a question about a classic novel, something most students skimmed or ignored, but Hannah had read it twice. She hesitated, then raised her hand, her voice trembling at first, but steady by the time she finished. The author wasn't just writing about survival. She said, he was writing about dignity, how people cling to it when everything else is stripped away. For a second, there was silence. Then, a laugh-sharp, mocking, deliberate Chloe. Always Chloe, sitting at the center of the classroom like she owned it, her polished nails tapping rhythmically against the edge of her desk. Wow. She said, her voice sweet and poisonous. Who knew? Survival came with literary commentary. The room chuckled. The teacher didn't say a word. Hannah felt the heat crawl up her neck, the sting of invisible eyes crawling over her. Do they even have books where you live? Chloe added, not even pretending to whisper. Another laugh, louder. This time Hannah lowered her gaze, her hands tightening in her lap. The teacher cleared his throat and turned to the board like nothing had happened. Of course he did. No one ever challenged Chloe, not. The teachers, not the students, not even the administrators. Her father's name was stitched into the fabric of the school, on the donor wall in the main lobby in the wing, with her name engraved on the art room door. And Hannah. She didn't have a last name, anyone recognized. She barely had shoes that held together. The rest of the class moved on without her. Notes scribbled, pages flipped. But Hannah couldn't hear anything over the thudding silence in her chest. She wasn't angry, not yet. She wasn't broken. She was used to this. But what she didn't realize, not in that moment, was that this day would be the last time Chloe ever laughed at her without consequence, because humiliation had always been a familiar guest in Hannah's life. But something else was on its way. Something louder. Older and far more powerful than anyone in that room could imagine. Lunch was always the longest hour of the day. Not because of hunger, but because it was the one place where the hierarchy wasn't just visible. It was staged, performed, sharpened. Hannah sat at her usual spot, a cold metal bench near the edge of the courtyard, half shielded by a tree that was too thin to matter. Her sandwich was wrapped in wax paper, her drink a reused bottle filled with tap water. She wasn't expecting kindness, but she also wasn't expecting today to break her. Not like this. It started with footsteps behind her, fast and deliberate. She heard giggles, then a whisper, too loud to be an accident. "Get ready," someone said. And then it happened. A tray piled with leftover spaghetti and chocolate milk upended over her back, soaking through her only jacket, dripping onto her sandwich, staining her notebook. For a split second, the courtyard went silent. Then came the laughter. Not just from Chloe, but from the others, too. The ones who usually just watched. One boy filmed it on his phone. Another pointed and said, "That's going in the group chat. Caption it, lunch on a budget." Hannah didn't move. She couldn't. Her breath caught chest heaving, not from rage but from something deeper. Something old, something that had waited years to erupt. She stood slowly peeling the jacket from her shoulders, the fabric cold and heavy with humiliation. Her eyes didn't water. Not yet. But her hands shook as she gathered what was left of her notebook and walked away. Not a word, not a scream, just silence. The kind that made them laugh even harder. She's crying someone called, though she wasn't. Not then, not yet. She kept walking through the building, out the doors down the street, until she reached the corner where the buses turned and the sidewalks cracked. There she sat, alone, jacket in her lap, sauce still dripping. And for the first time in years, she opened her phone and stared at the contacts she had never touched. It wasn't saved with a name, just the letter. J. She had always been told never to call unless it was serious. Unless something didn't make sense, unless she was ready for answers. With trembling fingers she tapped the number. The phone rang once, twice. Then a deep voice answered, calm. Unfamiliar, but heavy with something she couldn't place. "Who is this?" it asked. Hannah swallowed hard. "I think I'm someone you're looking for." There was silence, and then the voice, suddenly softer, shaking, whispered Hannah. She froze. "Yes." The voice exhaled like it had just found something lost in the dark. "Oh my God, is it really you?" Hannah's heart slammed in her chest. She didn't understand, but something inside her shifted, something ancient, something undeniable. And for the first time she didn't feel small. She felt seen. The silence on the other end of the line felt heavier than anything Hannah had ever carried. And yet, something about the way the man whispered her name made her stomach knot in a way that felt both terrifying and familiar. "How do you know my name?" she asked, her voice barely audible, but the man didn't answer right away. Instead, there was the sound of shuffling papers, a door closing, and then finally his voice returned lower, now more careful. "Can you tell me something, Hannah?" "Do you wear a necklace?" She blinked. "Yes, I've worn it forever. It's the only thing I've had since..." Her voice trailed off. She'd never really asked where it came from. She had been found as a toddler alone in a church parking lot, and the only thing with her was that necklace silver with a tiny starburst etched into the back, the front engraved with the initials G. The man on the phone inhaled sharply. "Is it silver with a star on the back?" Her hands went numb. "Yes." Then came the pause, the kind of pause that changes everything. "Hannah," he said slowly, like saying it too fast might break something. "You may not know this, but 20 years ago, a little girl named Genevieve Whitmore was taken from her family during a high-profile custody dispute that spiraled into something darker. Her mother, Evelyn Whitmore, has spent her entire fortune trying to find her. You were never meant to disappear, but someone made you vanish." Hannah didn't move, didn't speak. Her mouth was open, but her brain couldn't process the words fast enough to form sound. "That necklace was custom-made for Genevieve," the man continued. "Only one of its kind. The initials match. And your voice. God, your voice sounds just like hers did in those old tapes. We thought she was gone forever." She looked down at the necklace around her neck, her fingers trembling as they touched the metal. Could that really be her? Could the girl with secondhand shoes and soup-stained notebooks really be the missing daughter of a billionaire? "How do you know I'm not just someone else with a similar necklace?" she asked, not out of disbelief but defense. The man didn't hesitate because we already ran a trace on your location after you first appeared in our system last year. You enrolled in that school under a name we flagged years ago as a possible alias. We didn't act because we didn't want to make the wrong call. But now we know. She felt the world tilt slightly beneath her. the weight of years of being unwanted crashing into the possibility that someone somewhere had been trying to find her all along. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. "You don't have to do anything," the man said. "Just meet with us. We'll run a DNA test. It's painless, quick, and if you are who we believe you are, then—" He paused. "Your life is about to change." Hannah ended the call and just sat there, the phone still in her hand, the sun sliding lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. She didn't cry, she didn't smile, she just stared at her reflection in the screen, trying to understand how a girl with no name might actually have one that shook the world. That night, she didn't tell the woman who raised her, not yet. She sat on the edge of her bed, necklace in hand, her mind spiraling with memories that didn't make sense and moments that suddenly meant something else. The next morning, before the school gates even opened, a black car pulled up quietly across the street. No one got out at first. Then a man in a gray suit stepped onto the pavement, holding a folder, followed by two others. Calm, official, unreadable. The students arriving on foot began to slow. Teachers glanced from the windows. Whispers began to stir. By the time the first bell rang, half the school was buzzing with questions. Who were they? What were they doing here? And why were they asking for Hannah by name? In the principal's office, the man placed the DNA kit on the desk like a contract. If she agrees, he said this will take 5 minutes, then everything changes. But Hannah didn't hesitate. She had spent her whole life being ignored. This was the first time someone was finally asking who she really was. And for the first time, she was ready to find out. The results came faster than anyone expected. And when they didn't come with a whisper. They came with thunder. That morning, before the first class could settle in, before the rumors could evolve beyond half-spoken guesses. A black vehicle unlike any the school had ever seen rolled slowly into the front lot, its tinted windows reflecting the disbelief of every student who stopped to watch. It didn't park. It glided into place like it belonged there. 2 men in suits stepped out first. Tall, precise, moving, not with arrogance, but with authority. Then a woman followed, tall, striking, dressed in gray like storm clouds, and silenced her heels, clicking against the pavement in a rhythm that silenced chatter before she even reached the main steps. She walked into the front office without a word, followed by her team, and handed the principal a white folder embossed with gold. The room froze. Inside the envelope were 3 things: a letter of authorization from the Whitmore estate, a signed order confirming legal guardianship transfer, and a DNA report. At the bottom, 1 line, in bold, 99997% match. Genevieve Whitmore was located. The secretary covered her mouth. The principal sank into his chair. Outside, the students gathered by the windows, crowding shoulder to shoulder, breath fogging the glass. No one dared speak the truth out loud, but they all knew. The girl they ignored. The girl they laughed at. The girl with taped shoes and hand-me-down sweaters. She wasn't just someone. She was someone. Hannah stood outside the nurse's office, hands clenched, shoulders tense as the assistant whispered in her ear, "They're here for you." She blinked, trying to process it. They, who were they to someone like her? But when she turned and saw the woman waiting in the hallway, tall, elegant eyes brimming, not with pity, but something deeper, something breaking, it all clicked. Evelyn Whitmore didn't say anything at first. She stepped forward slowly, carefully, like approaching something sacred. Her hand lifted just slightly, then fell again, unsure, but Hannah didn't flinch. She didn't run. She simply whispered, "You're her, aren't you?" And Evelyn nodded, her voice cracking as she said, "You have my eyes." The hallway seemed to collapse into a single breath. A teacher walked past, stopped and looked again. Students peered from classroom doors. And suddenly, the school that once made her feel invisible now couldn't look away. Cameras weren't rolling, but the moment felt cinematic, raw, unrehearsed. Hannah took a step forward, not to embrace not yet, but to stand beside the woman who had lost her once and somehow found her again. They left together without a word. No backpack, no lunchbox, no apologies, just the truth. And behind them, a silence fell that had never existed before, because now the students knew. Everything they thought they understood had changed, and the girl they pushed to the edge was now at the very center of everything. The news broke faster than the school could contain. It faster than morning announcements or counselor whispers or last-minute meetings with PR consultants could prepare for. By noon, every student with a phone had already seen the headline, "Missing Heiress Genevieve Whitmore. Found. Living as a student at Crestwood High." But it wasn't just the headline that stopped them in their tracks. It was the photo Hannah, or rather Genevieve, stepping into a black car beside Evelyn Whitmore, the notoriously private tech billionaire whose name alone could freeze bank accounts and shift political tides. The comments flooded in theories, tangled with apologies no one had the courage to say aloud. And while students stared at their screens trying to make sense of what they saw, Chloe sat frozen in her chair, her fingers tight around her phone, reading the headline again and again, each time hoping the name would change. But it didn't. Genevieve Whitmore. The girl she spilled food on. The girl she mocked in class. The girl she publicly humiliated for being poor. Her breath caught when her father called. He never called during school hours. She stepped out into the hallway, phone pressed to her ear, voice shaking. "Dad, did you see?" But he wasn't calling to talk about the headline, he was calling because something worse had surfaced. "We have a problem," he said, voice clipped, the company that was linked to her disappearance. It wasn't random. One of the shell subsidiaries was ours. "My name's on the filing." Chloe went silent. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying if someone starts digging, this won't be a school scandal. It'll be a federal one." Her hands went numb. "Dad, I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know who she was. It doesn't matter anymore," he snapped. "The media knows, the lawyers are circling. If this ties back to me," he stopped himself. "You need to fix this. Apologize, grovel if you have to. Just get her to say she forgives you. Publicly." Chloe lowered the phone, slowly, heart thudding, blood roaring in her ears. Across the hall, the students who once followed her were now huddled around their phones, watching interviews with Evelyn Whitmore, who had just released a statement thanking the anonymous teacher who first filed the missing person. Tip, someone who, unlike most, had seen something more in the quiet girl with the bruised backpack and taped-up shoes. Later that day, Hannah Genevieve returned to campus for a brief visit escorted by a private security detail. She wasn't there for classes. She wasn't there to confront anyone. She was there to collect her things. Her steps were calm, her eyes unreadable. No designer clothes, no makeup, just the same girl. Only now every hallway seemed to bend around her. Chloe stood waiting near the lockers, rehearsing her apology, her voice cracking before she even spoke. "I didn't know," she whispered, stepping forward. "If I had, you would have treated me differently." Hannah replied, not unkindly, not cruelly, just honestly. Chloe blinked, stunned. "I didn't mean I know what you meant," she said. "That's the problem." And she walked past her, not with triumph, not with revenge, but with something Chloe had never carried, integrity. Because the third twist wasn't just that Hannah had been found, it was that she had already found herself long before anyone else had a clue. The world expected her to leave. To vanish behind gates and security codes, to swap her old life for penthouses and press releases, to re-emerge someday with a new name on a Forbes cover and an entourage in tow. But Hannah didn't leave. Genevieve didn't leave. She returned, not because she needed to prove anything, but because she understood something. None of them ever would. Dignity isn't about distance. It's about presence. So, when Evelyn Whitmore offered private tutors and international relocation, when lawyers suggested new identities and advisors begged her to disappear for a while to protect the family image, Hannah looked them all in the eye and said, "No, I'm going back to school tomorrow." The silence that followed was thick, stunned, but she didn't wait for permission. She chose to walk through the very doors that once let her fall. That morning, the black car arrived again, but this time, she stepped out alone. No guards, no cameras, no headlines trailing her heels. The same shoes, the same backpack, the same quiet walk down the corridor. But this time, the hallway didn't ignore her. It parted, heads turned, whispers hushed. Students watched with the breathless awe usually reserved for celebrities or storms. Hannah walked to her locker, opened it, pulled out her notebook, and shut it with the same rhythm she had followed for years. Her desk and homeroom remained the same back corner near the window, and when she sat down, no one dared occupy the seat beside her, not out of cruelty anymore, but out of reverence. Chloe watched from across the room, eyes heavy with everything she could no longer say. A teacher paused during roll call, voice catching just slightly before continuing. And still, Hannah said nothing, because this wasn't a speech moment. This wasn't a revenge scene. This was her choice to be seen on her terms, to return, not because they deserved it, but because she did. Because walking away might have been easy, but staying meant power. Real power, quiet power. And as she sat there, pen in hand, eyes focused, something shifted. Not just in the room, but in the culture. The laughter that once followed her died. The eyes that once mocked now searched for permission to meet hers. And the girl they once humiliated became the one whose silence carried the most weight of all. What started as whispers in a school hallway became a wave that no one could stop. Hannah's decision to return, to walk back into the very place that humiliated her without changing her clothes, her name, or her voice, sent shockwaves far beyond the walls of Crestwood High. News outlets called it the quietest rebellion of the decade. Commentators tried to define it, explain it, package it for morning shows and talk radio. But they all missed the heart of it. Because what truly changed wasn't just her, it was how others began to see themselves through her. Within days, invitations poured in, press interviews, podcast requests, documentaries begging for exclusive rights. But Hannah said no to all of them, all except one. A youth leadership summit in Chicago, hosted by an organization that offered scholarships to underprivileged students like the girl she once was. She stood on stage in a plain navy dress, the same shoes from school. No makeup, no teleprompter, just a single mic, and a room full of teenagers who leaned forward like every word she spoke could change their lives. And maybe it could. I'm not here to talk about being found. She began, her voice low but strong. I'm here to talk about being lost. Because I wasn't just missing from a billionaire's mansion. I was missing from every room where people were taught to value polish over purpose. She paused, scanning the crowd. I was judged by my shoes, my lunch, my silence. I was laughed at, ignored. But the worst part wasn't their cruelty. It was that I believed them. For years, I believed that worth had to come from wealth. She stepped closer to the edge of the stage. But here's what I've learned. You can't choose where you're born. You can't always control how people see you, but you can decide what you'll carry and what you'll leave behind. The applause began slowly, like thunder in the distance, then rose like a storm that refused to be quiet. Her speech was clipped into viral reels, shared in classrooms, replayed in youth centers, and subtitled in multiple languages. A new generation began to reference her, not as an heiress, not as a twist ending, but as something else entirely. Mirror teachers in underfunded schools printed her quote on posters. Dignity isn't luxury, it's a birthright. Parents whispered her name to their daughters when they were told to sit down or speak more softly. And back at Crestwood, something strange began to happen. A boy who once mocked her for her shoes left a new pair in a box by her lock. Run signed. A girl who never spoke to her now sat beside her in homeroom every day. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to learn how someone could carry so much grace without ever dropping the weight of what was done to her. And somewhere in a school thousands of miles away, a girl named Layla, bullied, overlooked, ready to give. Upwatched Hannah's speech on a cracked phone screen and decided not to skip class the next day, because now she knew strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it walks back into the room it was pushed out of and stays. The story could have ended there. A girl reclaimed by her birthright, a school silenced by its shame, a world momentarily awakened. But the real impact of what Hannah did wasn't in the headlines or hashtags. It was in the quieter places, the spaces that didn't make the news but changed anyway. In a soft-lit university office lined with books about human behavior and social perception. Nadine Sloan, a developmental psychologist who had spent her career studying identity and trauma, sat across from a camera and tried to explain what the world had just witnessed. Hannah Whitmore didn't just survive humiliation. She said her hands folded in front of her. She redefined how we measure strength, not by how loud we are or how quickly we strike back, but by how firmly we stand when the world expects us to fall. The footage shifted to images of Hannah at different moments. Not the dramatic ones, but the subtle ones, helping a girl fix her broken locker, standing in line with her classmates during lunch, speaking softly to a group of younger students who had gathered around her without needing a reason. Dr. Sloan's voice continued. When a person returns to the scene of their humiliation, Not for revenge, but to rewrite the memory. Not just for themselves, but for others. That's not just resilience, that's leadership. Then for the first time, an unreleased clip was shown, one taken a week after the summit on the rooftop of the Whitmore Foundation's headquarters. Hannah stood beside Evelyn, overlooking the skyline, as her mother quietly said, "You don't have to carry this alone." And Hannah, with the softest smile, replied, "I'm not carrying it anymore. I'm using it." The screen faded to black, and then came a letter. Handwritten, scanned, signed simply, Layla, age 13. It read, "Dear Hannah, I used to think I was nothing, but then I saw someone like me become everything. You made me believe that maybe I don't have to change who I am to matter. Maybe I already do." The final shot was of Hannah sitting on the floor of a crowded school hallway, not elevated, not separated, just present, surrounded by voices that once laughed, but now listened. And as the camera slowly pulled away, one last sentence appeared in white on black. Still and quiet, but unforgettable. She didn't need a throne. She built a table and made room for all the girls who had never been invited to sit. No. Music followed, no narrator, just silence. The kind that doesn't ask for more, but leaves you changed anyway. They called her a nobody. They pushed her to the edges. But when the truth came out, that the girl they tried to erase was the missing daughter of one of the most powerful women in the world, they didn't just lose control of the story, they lost control of the mirror, because she didn't come back to shame them. She came back to remind them that worth isn't worn, it's lived. That dignity doesn't come from money. It comes from how you treat the one you think has none. And now, because of her, no quiet girl will ever be invisible again.